Hello, weirdos. This is Brian Baugh, creator of Wulf and Batsy, back with you for another issue commentary. This time it's for issue 4, the second chapter of the Bizarre Experiments story arc. I really feel like this is the issue where this comic book series found its voice, so to speak. And I know that sounds like a totally pretentious artisty thing to say, but looking back, I feel like issue 1, 2, and 3, the We Have No Home story, and the first chapter of Bizarre Experiments was kind of like my figuring this thing out phase. And issue 4 is where I think it clicked. Whatever the spirit of Wulf and Batsy is, found itself. Not just the horror, but the weirdness, the sort of goofiness, the humor, the spiciness, that flavor, I guess, that this recipe that is Wulf and Batsy has just sort of gelled in issue 4, in my opinion. That's kind of how I look back on it. But anyway, at the time when I first wrote the story and I was really getting into it, my obsession was European horror films, which would become even stronger in years to come. But at this point, I was just really starting to get into them. And so Bizarre Experiments is sort of like my story where you can see that foundation of the Universal monster movies, but there's this like layer of the really weird, passionate, artsy, sort of sleazy, super violent and gory, very spicy European horror movie influence just starting to infect Wulf and Batsy. So getting into the issue, we start with this cover. Of course, Wulf is drooling. If you're going to draw a werewolf, you got to show him drooling, right? He's a slavering beast. And Batsy is adorned in a diaphanous nightgown, which is a trademark of the European horror films. Oh yeah, the fact that she has red candles is also a big deal to me. If you see the movie House of Usher with Vincent Price, there's red candles all over the place in that movie. I don't know what it is. When I see red candles, I feel like I'm in a very nice, cozy horror environment, and I'm very happy. Starting on page 1, we pick up right where issue 3 left off. Batsy, disguised in a very innocent-looking schoolgirl outfit, has infiltrated the home of the evil Professor von Zagzog and his butler, Sludge. And there also happens to be this young lady, the newspaper reporter Blonda Speckles, who has arrived to interview Professor von Zagzog. I love that Professor von Zagzog is so evil that he has a skull on his plate. Did he eat that? And Batsy, who's already had a meal of blood in issue 3, is settling for some fruit. This is inspired by an idea I saw in the movie Fright Night, where the vampire would eat fruit, like a fruit bat. Makes sense? And there's our title, Bizarre Experiments Part 2. Blonda says, "Well, Professor von Zagzog, I must say, that was a very interesting dinner." Zagzog says, "You're welcome, Miss Speckles. How did you like the escargot?" She says, "That was the only thing I didn't try. You'll have to excuse me. I'm not a real big fan of eating snails." "Oh, but you simply must try it. Escargot is an exquisite dish, like oysters but without the fishy taste. Wonderful, smooth texture." She tries to get out of it. She says, "No thanks. Now, as I was saying earlier, I was sent by the Epworth Ruddy Gazette to get an exclusive interview with you and try it. Try the escargot." She takes one, chucks it in her mouth, and only after she eats it, Professor von Zagzog offers this helpful piece of information. "In some parts of the world, it is believed that eating snails brings bad luck." And this is where I need to make a little behind-the-scenes confession. This whole sequence with the escargot was inspired by a date that I went on way back in the year 2000. Before I met my wife, I was back in my hometown visiting and bumped into a girl that I'd been friends with in high school, and we went out for dinner, and she wanted to order escargot, and I actually had never tried escargot before. And the dialogue here about I never really thought about eating snails, and the oh, you must try it. It's like oysters but without the fishy taste. Wonderful smooth texture. The roles were reversed. I was the one saying I've never tried that before, and my very elegant, classy lady friend was the one trying to coax me into having it with this information here. In fact, that's almost a direct quote as I remember. And the funny thing is, I actually really like oysters. I really do. I'm a big seafood guy. And so I thought, oh, might as well try it. I mean, if the texture's the same as oysters, that's fine. And that might be interesting. I don't know. And I actually got really interested, and I did try it, and I did think it was all right. And we ate a whole plate of it, and it was nice. But, to me, it was lacking that sort of saltwater seafood flavor that oysters have, and felt like it was kind of missing something. So I've never really ordered it since then. But anyway, it seemed like a funny scene to recreate in a comic book with the most demented slant on it possible. I kind of like this line from Professor von Zagzog where he says, "Why, may I ask, is your newspaper so interested in my work now? Because I'm not going back to jail no matter what they..." "Oh, no, sir, it's nothing like that." I don't know, just the implication that at some point he was in jail and we don't know why. It's just part of his mysterious past. I find it amusing. "Hey, there's flies buzzing around that ham. What kind of place you running here, Mr. Zagzog?" Zagzog yells at Sludge, "Sludge, I require more escargot. Go fetch some." And poor Sludge says, "Master, there's no more snail in the kitchen." "Try looking in the crawl space under the tool shed. You'll find some." "But master, it will take too long to cook." "Stupid! You don't have to cook them, just fetch them." And Batsy, being the nice little gal that she is, pipes up, "Hey, that's not a nice way to talk to someone." "Excuse me?" "You're so rude to poor Sludge. Can't you see he only wants to help?" "Rude? He is lucky I don't amputate his limbs and use him as a doorstop." I just love Professor von Zagzog. He gets all the best dialogue. There's a little horror Easter egg here. You'll notice the picture over the fireplace says E. Belasco. And if you know your horror literature and your horror movies, you should recognize that as Emmerich Belasco. He was the mysterious villain in Richard Matheson's novel Hell House, which was turned into the classic movie Legend of Hell House. If you haven't seen it, I recommend you do. I also like the idea that Professor von Zagzog just happens to be friends with some evil bastard like that. He's friends with all the evil bastards. He's a popular guy. And Blonda, trying to make the best peace, says, "Maybe it would be best to conduct this interview at a quieter time. How about tomorrow morning?" "How about when hell freezes over?" Anyway, that puts a cold dash of water on that conversation, and the girls retire to the guest room. Cut to outside the house, where Bill Bucklebones is lurking, and you see all these silly signs here. There's definitely a Mad Magazine sense of humor to Wulf and Batsy. That does come into it every now and then. I suppose one thing that's kind of worth pointing out about this particular panel is this is really the only time you ever see the backside of Zagzog Mansion. This is the reverse angle of it from when it was established in issue 3. Wulf emerges from the forest, growling, and Bill Bucklebones says, "Still can't find anything to eat. The hunger's making you crazy, huh?" We cut to the inside of the house, where we see Batsy and Blonda getting undressed for bed in the guest room that they are sharing. This is where things get a little bit cutesy with Blonda in her lingerie and stockings and Batsy in the open shirt there. It's kind of funny. I've gotten a lot of private original art commission requests for Batsy in this outfit. Nothing sleazy, just, Batsy in this state of undress. I think people like it because it's suggestive, but, it's still kind of innocent. Because she's still basically covered up, Of course, as soon as I say that, she drops her skirt. Thanks a lot, Batsy. Anyway, let's see what's happening here. Blonda says, I don't care if he did make me eat a live snail. The man is rich, and that makes him an absolute dreamboat. Can you believe all that exotic food? It must have cost a fortune. Batsy's like, money isn't everything, Blonda. Blonda's still daydreaming. And all those servants waiting on him. I never had any issues with gold digger type girls in real life, but I don't know. I just think the stereotype is funny. Here's a wide shot, because, that's the responsible artist, visual storyteller thing to do. And I really like decorating Professor von Zagzag's house with Venus flytraps. If you keep an eye out, you'll notice them all over the place. Thump, thump. Someone's coming. Act casual. The door barges open, and it's Sludge. Hi, Sludge. And they're trying to be all innocent in this state of dress. This is something I just find funny about, like, exploitation horror movies. They always do stuff like this where the most, gratuitous things are happening right in front of your eyes, and everybody kind of acts like they don't see it. I actually snuck some cool book titles in here on the spines. I know there's a couple Dashiell Hammett novels in here. Red Harvest, The Glass Key. Anyway, so he's brought them a bottle of wine. And, of course, Blonda's like, sure, we weren't talking about anything, were we? Playing all innocent. And here's Batsy saying, no, just changing for bed, that's all. Blonda takes the wine bottle. Meanwhile, Batsy's opening the window and saying, no thanks, all I want is some fresh air. She's looking for Wulf. She says, he hasn't eaten all night. That's not good. Hunger can make a werewolf even more dangerous than usual. Ferocious, frenzied, oblivious to everything else going on around him. This is reminding us of a minor plot point that came up in issue 3. It's not really a big deal in this particular chapter, but it will pay off at the end of issue 6. Blonda is seeing Sludge out, and she looks to Batsy and says, is everything okay, Vicky? Now, if you remember in issue 3, Batsy was using an alias, calling herself Vicky. But Blonda says, did you see something out there? And then we cut to Batsy sheepishly leaning against the wall, and she says, it's nothing, probably just an owl. That line is inspired by a joke in the movie Saturday the 14th, which is a horror parody film that was on HBO about 8 zillion times when I was a kid, and I watched it every single time it was on. So anyway, Blonda says, you gotta try this wine, it's dreamy. And there is something to this wine, we will find out later. We return to the main hall of Zagzag Mansion. Sludge comes walking into the room and he says, Master, guests in bed. Zagzag says, I don't trust that girl, Sludge. You mean the reporter? No, the other one. Oh, I get a creeping feeling from that little black-haired girl. All right, confession time again. If you were a weird, angsty, artsy, depressed teenager in the 1980s, you probably know where this line comes from. Because that's the kind of teenager I was in the 80s, and I was a huge fan of The Cure. And this line about a creeping feeling from that little black-haired girl, that comes from the song 100 Years by The Cure. I don't know about other writers, but I don't know. I just have all those kind of weird, cool song lyrics that you loved your whole life, and quotes from movies and quotes from books that you loved. And I got all that stuff just like floating around in the back of my brain all the time. And I don't know, sometimes it comes out in character dialogue when I'm doing my stories. Who knows? It just does. Anyway, he says, she is an unnatural creature. I always knew my work would draw her kind. And he says, "Get the mirror out of storage. When the monsters come, we'll be ready." What could he mean by that? The mirror. I like this drawing of him here. Although he never smokes a pipe again. I don't know why he got all sophisticated in this one scene, but we never see this pipe again. Cutting back to Batsy and Blonda's room. Blonda's out cold, and Batsy is reading a book. Montague Summers. He was a famous pastor in God knows when he lived, but he actually believed that vampires and werewolves were real. He really believed in the forces of darkness and the supernatural, like in monster movie like terms, and how they are evil and they must be fought. So look up Montague Summers. He's a trip. Batsy leans in and sniffs, and she determines the wine was spiked. Zagzog wanted us out cold. And she gets out of bed in her very 1960s, 1970s European horror movie style nightgown, grabs her candelabra, and we go into her big scene. A scene that turns up in more European horror movies than I can even list. Almost every European horror film seems to find an excuse to show the brave heroine in the middle of the night in her diaphanous nightgown, get out of bed, grab a candelabra, and go roaming around the villain's lair, trying to solve the mystery. It's inevitable. It happens in almost every single European horror film, and I love it. So, of course, I had to do that with Batsy. There's probably a long list of Hammer movies that I saw at an impressionable age. Twins of Evil was probably the major one. That's kind of like the ultimate female vampire in nightgowns movie. But there's plenty of other ones. The Paul Naschy movies certainly encourage this. I'm sure a psychoanalyst would have a field day with these comic books. But the way I look at it, the see-through nightgown is to horror what the metal space bikini is to science fiction. It's the classic attire that makes the heroine look great. So it's a lot of fun. Part of the fantasy. But this became sort of Batsy's, alternate costume after I did this story. She opens up the door and lets her friends inside. And she gives Wulf a little smooch since she's so happy to see him. And she says, "I've got a yummy reward for you when this is over." Talk about suggestive. I guess there's a couple of different ways you could interpret that, especially considering her attire. But no, she just means Blonda. He's hungry, remember? He's a werewolf. Well, they have a potential victim for him. She lets them in. They come into the hallway. Wulf is sniffing around. And notice this picture over here on the wall. That's a little clue to something in a future issue. Wulf suddenly notices Batsy in her new costume. She says, "Wulf, what are you staring at?" And he's a little bit embarrassed, and she just giggles. And Bill Bucklebones is all business. He says, "Let's get moving." We cut to Sludge, looking down on the unconscious Blonda Speckles. There's those Venus flytraps again. And he carries her away. So, our villains have intentions for Blonda also. This girl is in a bad spot. Cutting back to our monster heroes, Batsy says, "Now, this way." Batsy says, "Look in here." She finds these secret plans on the floor. Zagzog seems to have patented a surgical means of extending and retracting one's own skull, disassembling and reassembling human corpses, surgically redesigning one's own bone structure. I like what that suggests. Just the idea of Zagzog doing surgery on himself, on his own skull. I gotta draw that scene one of these days. She looks up and she sees his medical books on the shelf, and she says, "Wulf, lift me up there." And you get this very cute, gratuitous leg shot of Batsy reaching up there and pulling a book down. And the book is called "Long Live the New Flesh" by Professor Claude von Zagzog, with an introduction by Dr. Brian Oblivion. Now, just because the first name is the same, there's no relation. Brian Oblivion was a character in the movie Videodrome. by David Cronenberg, another great 1980s horror movie. They continue down these stairs into a dungeon. Bucklebone says, "Hey, what's that light coming around the next corner?" And then we get this nice big splash page. So now we know what Batsy meant when she said she had a yummy reward for Wulf when this is all over. She was planning to feed Blonda to him. But getting back to Zagzog's villainy, here he is leering at the unconscious Blonda. But she wakes up and she says, "Huh? Where am I?" And Zagzog says, "You are here with me in the cold black womb of my murderous genius." And we get this kind of nice wide shot where you see the whole room. But I just think it's important to do a shot like this every once in a while, where you establish the geography of the room and where everybody is in relationship to each other, especially when you're dealing with a scene that's starting to get a little crowded with a lot of characters involved. I drew this comic, again, back in the early 2000s, when I was just starting out my career, my day job, working as a storyboard artist in TV animation. So I had a head full of all these different kinds of visual storytelling rules that help with your storytelling clarity and all those kind of things. Working in animation storyboards is great for that, though. It's like I used to say it was kind of like going to a second art school that's entirely dedicated to visual storytelling. It's all about clarity and making sure the reader is not confused or lost ever. So it's good to do things like that, you know? Blonda asks, "Why am I strapped down? And where is Vicky?" And he basically tells her to shut up. But then he says, "But you raise a fair question. Sludge, where is our dear little Vicky?" Meaning Batsy. "Only one girl in bed, other girl missing. Please don't hit me." Never trust a monster to do the work of an evil scientist. Remember what I was saying earlier about popular quotes from different things getting stuck in your memory and then coming out in character dialogue? This is another example of that. This line comes from one of my favorite Bugs Bunny cartoons. I believe the title is Water, Water Every Hair. I might be wrong about that, but it's the one where Bugs Bunny gets captured by the mad scientist, and the mad scientist has this line. However, probably a bigger reason why this line gets stuck in my head is because it was brilliantly used in the form of a sample by my favorite band of all time, Skinny Puppy, in the remix version of their song Deep Down Trauma Hounds. They used a variety of samples from that Bugs Bunny cartoon in that song. And that was one of the lines, and that's probably why it gets stuck in my head. One of those times, again, where I was just writing my story for my comic book, and it just kind of naturally came out, and funny little homage to two different things I love and felt right in the story, so there you go. Anyway, Zagzog says, "Well, Miss Speckles, you wanted a story, let me give you one. The nature of flesh is pliability. It can be changed, it can be sliced, carved, and sculpted into a myriad of improved shapes. My noble dream is to perfect the human configuration, to surgically construct a glorious new race from the remains of the old race." And Blonda says, "Vicky was right about you. You're demented. You'll never be able to do that." And here comes my big Watchmen ripoff moment. Remember that scene in Watchmen where Ozymandias is explaining his big plan? And they're all like, "Oh, give me a break. Are you crazy? You'll never be able to pull that off." And then he says, "Do you think I'd go into that big supervillain monologue if I hadn't already taken care of everything I'm talking about?" Well, that's what Zagzog does here. He says, "Never be able to, Miss Speckles. I already have done it." And these mutants come around the corner, and then we get this big wide shot where you see a selection of his Monstros Sapiens, the new race that he has invented, with his surgery on the corpses from the cemetery that he stole, and he's very proud of himself. And here we have a sequence that may have been the original inspiration for the bizarre experiments of Professor von Zagzog in the first place. So, Christmas night, 1996. It's a long story, but that was the first year ever where I was completely alone on Christmas night. and it was pretty depressing. So to cheer myself up, I did this crazy drawing of a mad scientist monster with a gorgeous lady in a Victorian dress strapped down on an operating table. He appears to be doing some sort of weird experiment on her, but he looks like this crazy, hideous monster in a lab coat. And it was so funny. It made me laugh, and it just led me to think, what in the world could have led to this situation? And right then and there, I promised myself, someday I will draw a whole comic book to explain this crazy scene. And on a whim, I just jotted down the title. And the title was The Bizarre Experiments of Professor von Zagzog. So that's the origin for the title and the character, and I had that silly idea in the back of my mind for the next 3 years until I came up with Wulf and Batsy, and I suddenly had characters to tell stories about and draw their adventures, and it just seemed like, I should pull that crazy monster scientist guy out of my back pocket and make him the villain. And so that's kind of where the origins of Professor von Zagzog come from. And here he reveals the work he's been doing on his own head. He splits his face open in a scene probably inspired by the ending of the movie Sword and the Sorcerer, which I saw in the 4th grade, and it really warped me a great deal. But there's a great scene at the end of that movie where an evil wizard rips his own face in half and turns into the evil sorcerer. But Zagzog turns into this insane thing. So this whole sequence is just like layers and layers of weird influences that all kind of piled up and led me to make this comic book. He says, "Soon I will rebuild all Homo sapiens into a race of magnificent monstro sapiens." He pulls out this big meat cleaver and says, "I've been curious to attempt the reconstruction of a female subject." Hold still. And just as he's going for her, Wulf and Batsy come around the corner. "Stop right there." And Zagzog says, "And so the weirdos join us at last." To be continued. We'll have to find out what happens next issue. The very last page of the issue is, of course, Captain Bloodclot's famous novelties. There's all kinds of great offers in this one. Look at this. You can get a live pet alligator. We got ads for fresh roadkills, the giant ghost, sexy severed legs, and this great book, Worm Boy. The touching yet ghastly true story of the good little boy who only wanted to eat worms and the cruel world of parents and teachers who tried to stop him. Oh, look at this. I almost forgot. We do have one more page of Captain Bloodclot ads. There's an official flag from Transylvania, only $1.98. Pretty cool. Oh, look at this. You can build your own laser gun. All kinds of cool stuff. Oh, here, look at this. This is what I was talking about, see? 1960s to 1970s European horror movie style see-through nightgowns. See, it is a real thing. I didn't just make it up. It's right here in Captain Bloodclot. Here's an ad for the Dayton Yellow Springs Road JC's Haunted House. That's the one I used to go to when I was a kid in elementary school. I don't think it's there anymore. Oh yeah, I forgot about this little problem we ran into behind the scenes. I got a little mad at Batsy for modeling these nightgowns for Captain Bloodclot because I've always been convinced that they're crooks. I asked her not to, very nicely. See, there's my skinny puppy shirt. You know, she's too nice for her own good sometimes. She just can't tell anybody no. Anyway, that is Wulf and Batsy, issue 4. I hope you enjoyed this commentary. And I hope you'll join me again for the next commentary for issue 5 with more werewolves and more vampiresses in nightgowns. Okay, so there's one more odd trivia fact related to this issue. And this one is actually not funny or cool or anything like that. In fact, it's actually kind of dark and serious and disturbing, and heartbreaking. And I almost didn't bring it up because I was afraid it might be in poor taste or disrespectful, but I'll just say it because it is kind of a weird fact. So, as I said, I created this drawing very late at night, probably like 2 or 3 in the morning on Christmas 1996. Well, if you know your true crime, that date might ring a bell. At the exact same time that I was doing this drawing, creating the arch villain of my comic book series, there was a famous unsolved murder that was taking place, like literally almost at the exact same time to the hour, by the experts' estimation of when they think the crime happened. And I didn't even realize it until much, much later, but I was reading a true crime book, reading about a particular case that I had always heard about, but I didn't really know the details. And when I made the connection, put 2 and 2 together, it kind of weirded me out. To think that I was sitting there drawing this, having a good old time, and many states away, this terrible murder was actually occurring. Just a weird fact, you know? And I'm not saying that there's any relevance to that and my comic or anything like that. It's just a strange curiosity. A very weird, haunting fact.